welcome Sarah. As you know, she spent 7 hours in an airport today. I got stuck in a subway coming here, and Bob actually had a couple of his teeth knocked out by an errant hockey puck earlier this week. So there have been a lot of forces against us, but we've all made it here. And also a book that Bob didn't mention, which I'm going to be referencing a couple times tonight, is this really nice collection of essay / memoirs called Writing in an Age of Silence, which just came out in 2010, I think, or?
I think 9. But,
oh, okay. And so I just wanted to start with some of the things you talked about in the memoir in there about you growing up and feeling that, first of all, you're saying that, you know, your brother taught you to read before, you know, you could even remember reading, and that you're always making up stories. Did you always know at that young age that you wanted to be a writer?
I don't think that I thought of myself as a writer. I still don't. Okay, this is being taped. Let's edit this. I'll back up. And I always think of Richard Nixon. Please eliminate the last 18 minutes of tape here. You know, I think any child who gets told by an important adult that they're good at something, they focus on it. And I was really lucky when I was 9 that my 4th grade teacher told me that I wrote well. And so I kept writing. But the time and place where I grew up, girls were not expected to do things outside the home. And so I wrote very privately. And it was a long time before I tried to write for publication.
You also write that your mother could have gone to medical school, but ended up just not doing it, partially out of just a kind of, you know, of course you don't know why, because you never talked about it, but did you feel that as a woman that there was a lot of constraints against you growing up to be a writer?
I think that women have always been writers and good writers, and yet in my particular family, my particular milieu, there was a lot of pressure not to succeed. I've never understood why my mother, at a time when medical schools would admit one woman in a class, why she turned her back on a chance to go to medical school. I think it was cold feet, but I don't really know.
Mm-hmm. And so did you read a lot of mysteries growing up?
I read tons of mysteries, but I'll confess that Nancy Drew, I think it's just perversity. Everything happens so easily for Nancy. I mean, I remember one mystery. She's locked in a steamship hold, and she tap dances SOS on the wall of the steamer.
Well, a lot more people were proficient with Morse code at that time.
I mean, it wasn't that she was so good at so many things, but she was rich. No crime ever really daunted her or stopped her for more than 30 seconds. Nobody ever said no when she wanted to go out and wrestle with murderers. She was good at everything. She was kind of like Peter Wimsey, you know. I liked my heroines to suffer before they succeeded. I like Jane Eyre, you know.
And so at what point, after you moved to Chicago when you were 19, mm-hmm. and between then and the writing of your first V.R. Warshawski novel, what was that process? Did you know at any point that, I mean, you were writing, I guess, academic papers, but at what point did you think that you might want to write a novel?
Well, I was continuing to write privately, I mean, fiction privately, and poetry, which will be published with my posthumous works. But I did corporate writing, I did public relations. I published a little magazine that went to Fortune 1000 companies on urban issues. And I think it was when I first read Raymond Chandler. I was 23. And in 6 of Chandler's 7 novels, it's a woman who presents herself in a sexual way who turns out to be the main villain. And this was this was true for all of my friends, of course, that they used their bodies to get what they wanted and then turned out to be really wicked. But it wasn't true for me. And I wanted a detective who more reflected my experience. But man, I didn't have confidence in my writing voice, and it was really a good 8 years of, I'd write a paragraph, I'd write a page. I had a really hard-boiled woman named Minerva Daniels she drank cheap bar whiskey and she smoked. And into her life, a man with slim hips and broad shoulders would come. And then I would just sort of stop there because I couldn't figure out how to move it forward.
Was there an incident in your life or some kind of inspiration that made you come up with the first Warshawski case?
I think I was born with a chip on my shoulder, and when I worked for a multinational insurance company in Chicago, I worked for a guy who, in today's parlance, had a lot of issues. And I was in a meeting in his office, Grant Park, the big public park on Chicago's lakefront, where various riots always take place there. Looking down at Buckingham Fountain, the trees were dead. It was October. And my boss, whom I always call Fred to avoid libel and slander litigation, he was saying his usual drivel, and my lips were saying, "Gosh, Fred, heck of an idea," and the balloon over my head was saying something really unprintable and not worth repeating in a public library either. And at that moment, really literally, thinking private thoughts on company time, VI came to me because I thought, what I really wanted was not this sort of parody of the Philip Marlowe character, but I wanted a woman like me and my friends who was doing a job that really didn't exist for women when we were in school. But she had a sex life because she was human, and she could solve problems. And she said what was in the balloon over her head because she didn't care if she got fired.
And do you think that's a big part of her appeal? Is that, she doesn't have a lot of problem speaking her mind?
I think, it's hard for me to say, and it's an awkward question, but I just heard from a reader, there's a breakdown, the new book, there's a place where a unsympathetic cop has come barging into her apartment to ask her questions, and she lies on the floor doing abdominal exercises with her eyes shut while he's leaning over, practically spitting in her face. And the reader said that was her favorite part of the book. And I think there's a way in which the fact, I'm not very brave actually myself, but the fact that she'll speak up and speak out and say what's in the balloon is a big part of her appeal, I guess. I don't know, I hope. Because she and I both get crankier with age.
And at what point do you think you knew that you were going to stick with her as a character?
Oh my, at what point did I think I knew I was going to stick with her? When I wrote the first book, I really was trying to see if I could write a book. I wanted to create this woman detective. It sold 4,500 copies, 2,500 to libraries. So that was enough in those days that the publisher asked for a second book. I hadn't planned to write a second book. I thought I had said what I had to say about her in the first one. And then the second one led to a third one, and at that point I knew I was staying with her. And the funny thing is that, I keep thinking, I should create a new series, a new character, someone younger, hipper. And I have created 2 different young women characters that were in short stories published in different anthologies. But VI she sort of is where my heart is, I think. They just didn't come to life for me the way she does.
And is she, do you feel like she's kind of evolved as you've kind of, I guess to have such a long relationship with a character, fictional character, of course, has she changed? I mean, when you look back on those early novels, how does that look for you? Does it feel like it was written by somebody else, or?
Well, I try not to read them because everything that's wrong with them jumps out at me. But when I think about her history or our history together, I think in the early books she was much brasher and less angst-ridden. And I think my hope was that those qualities would rub off on me, but instead my sort of high level of anxiety is rubbed off on her. So sadly, she's come to resemble me more than she ought to. And you know, one thing, I had a letter, as I used to drink a lot of single malts, and I had a wonderful collection. I still have it because I don't drink that much anymore. I just can't handle liquor that well anymore. And unconsciously, I had deprived the girl detective. And I got a letter from a man he wrote to me from England. He said that he was president of the Armagnac Society. Wouldn't that be a lovely job? And he said in the early books, she used to drink a lot of lovely Armagnac and whiskeys and things, and why wasn't she drinking so much anymore? And I thought, oh, poor VI, there she is. You know, she's being left for dead in swamps and canals and burning buildings, and at least she ought to get a drink. So I have made a conscientious effort to up her alcohol consumption.
Do you get a cut of Armagnac sales?
I wish.
And so, I just wanted to ask, what was the whole crime fiction scene like when you first broke in? Especially introducing, you know, an overtly feminist character into still very much a male-dominated milieu. Was it receptive? Was it hostile? Both, I guess, amongst other crime writers and critics, but also amongst readers.
Critics were pretty responsive right away, and it wasn't until a couple of years down the road, and I began meeting a lot of other women crime writers, that I started finding out that most women were having a really tough time getting their books attended to. And when I look back on it and think about it, I mean, Sue Grafton, who published her first book in '82, as I published mine, she and I were doing something that was perceived as rather male. And so we fit, even though we had women characters, we fit into a template that reviewers could respond to. Mm-hmm. And people who were writing something that was a little softer boiled, even if it was like Marcia Muller with her investigator for the legal collective, just didn't get the attention we were getting. And that was really why we started Sisters in Crime, because libraries really make, or at least did, I don't know about today, but they really made their buy decision based on seeing a book reviewed in at least 2 and sometimes 3 nationally juried newspapers or publications. So if you weren't being reviewed, and libraries still to this day are the core buyers of books, maybe not for John Grisham, but libraries, my sales, 40% of my sales go to libraries. So I want their budgets increased. But it took some work to really open the doors for women, and we got a lot of hostility. I mean, it was when we started Sisters, we got incredible hate mail and attacked by people in the industry. Why they felt threatened, I don't know, but that was then. This is now.
And so that's changed over the years?
It's changed over the years. I think publishers have seen that we really helped grow readership for the crime novel, because when we started Sisters, and the first thing we did was to put out books in print by women writers and then by the men who also joined Sisters. And I mean, we didn't want to be confrontational because we didn't have any power. We needed the industry and we needed booksellers, but we just sent our books in print directly to libraries and to bookstores. They started carrying our titles. We heard from a lot of readers saying, I gave up on the crime novel after I left Nancy Drew because I never saw a woman character that felt real to me. And then they would start reading books by Sisters in Crime. And so I think single-handedly Sisters in Crime saved the publishing industry in New York.
Do you think there's a difference between still, do you find that there's readers who will only read they want to read books with a female detective or a male detective, or is that kind of fallen?
You know, I don't really know. I'm not looking at data anymore the way I used to. Personally, I go for the good writing, and I read books by men, women, dogs if they write well. The book that won the British crime writers Gold Dagger this year was actually by an American, a man. I think his name was Tom Franklin. The book was called Crooked Letter, Crooked Letter. I thought it was a beautiful book. And I want to read a good book, and I think most readers are like that, except for the reviewers at the Wall Street Journal. I don't know. They have a very innovative book review section, I think, but more and more it's only books by men reviewed by men, so that's kind of depressing.
And what do you think of the, I wanted to ask what you think of the Stieg Larsson novels. What do you think of her as a kind of feminist hero?
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about that. I mean, I know that she's incredibly popular, and of course the books are incredibly popular, and Larsson gave me a shout out in the first book, so I should keep my opinions to myself. But I won't. I read the first book. Is that The Dragon Tattoo?
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, yeah.
And then I was hoping that it was going to be a financial crime story with Blomqvist, the reporter, but it turned out to be serial murders and weird sex crimes. And her abuse described in such loving, graphic detail, it troubled me, as does the fact that looks like a boy. I mean, I wish she's 20-something. I wish that she could have had an adult woman's body, but she's described as looking like a teenage boy. And I think these things, they do trouble me, but nonetheless, there she is. She's tough, she's hardworking, she's clever, she's crafty, and she solves these crimes. So that's a real plus. That's why I feel so ambivalent.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like a lot of the novels hinge on a kind of revenge fantasy, which is perhaps not as progressive as having just even though she is almost superhuman in her ability to get revenge on these people, she's still consistently victimized. Mm-hmm. And also on the level of violence. Have you tried to avoid? I mean, there's not a lot of graphic descriptions of violence in your work. Is that conscious?
It is, because I think it's really hard to keep from veering over into sort of a pornography of violence, and titillation of violence, and I'm not comfortable with that as a writer any more than I am as a reader. Mm-hmm.
So I just want, now your latest novel, Breakdown, it opens with a group of tween vampire groupies, the Vina Fields Carmilla Club, and they're performing a ceremony at a graveyard, and they are big fans of a literary character called Carmilla, Queen of the Night. I was just wondering if you were satirizing a certain author in a certain series about vampires and other shapeshifters.
Well, I have a 17-year-old granddaughter, and when she was 12, she was totally addicted to those nameless novels by the unknown author, known to the mayor of Toronto, but not so much so that she would sit at a wedding reception with it under the table, reading it and I said, "What's the appeal?" And she said, "Oh, Granny, I just like them." And I thought, "Oh, okay." So, but I've always been, since then, fascinated by how they do drag these girls in. Carmilla, Queen of the Night, was the first lesbian vampire. She was created by the Franco-Irish thriller writer Sheridan Le Fanu in the 1850s. And so this was also, besides having some fun with creating it, it was also sort of a tip of the hat to the old heroes of the
I've read a lot of his stuff, and he actually was the first people to ever have a character who's a paranormal investigator. So he was kind of writing, the X-Files and, Victorian Dublin.
Go to your public library. They
Yes,
have that
they
book
actually, they do
there.
have his books here. And then after that, the novel turns quite serious, and there's you have a sort of a number of subplots about different senatorial candidates. One who's a kind of ultra right wing, and one who's, I guess you could say, is a liberal. Were you drawing a lot from current events when you were writing it, or were these things just on your mind, or? Because I'm curious to see how you.
Well, I know this is being taped and that therefore I ought to be careful with what I say, because in fact I can't get libel and slander insurance because I'm always skating a little close to the edge. I was very troubled by a lot of the rhetoric around President Obama, especially once he took office, and you can see it online on a lot of right-wing websites. You'll hear it on some American television channels, and the rhetoric doesn't just skate to the edge of racism. It really goes right into it, and there's
Races it.
Yeah, and you'd see posters with a picture of a lion, and this is an African lion, and we have a lion African in the White House. And so in my book, I have my own cable news channel, the Global Entertainment Network, which is headquartered in Chicago, conveniently enough. And they talk about the progressive candidate for Senate is an African-American woman. And they talk about her name is Sophie Durango, but they call her Durango. Time to send Durango back to the zoo, they'll say. And so that really was coming directly from the attacks on the president.
Mm-hmm. And also there's a lot in there about one of the characters, her old friend, being mentally ill. Did you have to do a lot of research for that, or like investigating, mental institutions, but you'd worked in that field as an advocate?
I don't know a lot about it, but like many people, I don't know whether it's most people, certainly many of us have experience of mental illness just in our families and in our lives, and some of it was drawn from that. I did a lot of research with one of the advanced practice psychiatric nurses that I worked with when I worked with the mentally ill homeless, and she kind of stepped me through a lot of the protocols and treatments. I had this idea, which I think would have been a disaster. It would have been a disaster if I'd done it, but that VI was going to go undercover in a mental hospital. But I couldn't quite figure out how to get her there, and I took advice of a law professor who runs a free clinic for mentally ill people who've been declared, arrested for crimes and can't afford counsel. And he said, just get over that idea. He said, VI would lose her license. Lottie, if she persuaded Lottie to sign the papers, would lose her license to practice medicine, and on top of it, she might never get out. So I think he really saved me. He saved me a lot of work. I was having trouble figuring out how to get her into the hospital, but I think he also saved me a lot of plot grief.
Yeah, because looking through your books, you usually have some fairly lengthy acknowledgments about all of the experts that you've drawn on. Do you just go and ask? Like doctors, lawyers, litigators, insurance people, finance. Do you just go and ask, or? I
do. When I wrote my second book, Deadlock, it was set in the Great Lakes shipping industry, and I knew I really needed to see an ore freighter, and so I called companies in Chicago that shipped on the lakes, and they just laughed at me. I not only wasn't published, nobody bought my first book. And then we went up to the Sioux, my husband served, well, he was in the Canadian Navy, seconded to the Royal Navy during the Second World War, and he's never lost his love of big ships, and so we used to go and look at them in the Sioux. And he's also a physicist, and he stood there one day and he said, I wonder what would happen if you blew up one of these freighters. So I decided to write a book for him about why someone would do that. And then we saw the biggest shipper on the lake was Canada Steamship, which is headquartered in Montreal. And so I called them. I was pretty shy, but I called them, and they were so nice, unlike the Yankees, the Canadians.
But we're known for that.
Yeah.
We're all very nice.
And they lived up to it. So the guy, the dispatcher, said, do you want to sail for a day, a week, a month, or a year? And I was still working full-time for the insurance company, where they gave us 10 days of vacation every year, and I had 5 left, so I said a week. And he said, okay, be at Thunder Bay, at elevator, whatever, at 6 Monday morning. So we drove like maniacs. It was Saturday night then, and got there, and I had no idea what to expect. They put me up in this stateroom. It was wonderful. I got to sail from Thunder Bay to the Welland Canal, and they gave me the run of the ship. Everyone talked to me because they were so bored with each other. And even a very shy person, I didn't have to ask anything. They would just talk. And then I thought, I had $632 in the bank, and I thought, how much is this going to cost the stateroom, eating at the captain's table? And finally, my last morning on board, I said, no one's mentioned anything as vulgar as money. And he said, oh, we can't charge you. We'd have to advertise as a passenger ship. So that was the best research of my entire life. And then after that, my husband met me at the Welland Canal and took me to Niagara on the Lake, where we had this embarrassing experience with the library. And then I thought, America pays lip service to literacy, but we're really bigger on blood sports. So, I'm sorry.
No, I've been trying to think of some way of getting a free vacation out of that story that you just told.
Well, call
Some
Canada
research.
Steamship. Right. You're doing an article for the Star, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'll talk to Bob about that. What about with when you? I imagine you've spoken to a number of police officers. Do they? I guess they must walk a pretty fine line if you're asking them about, how things are conducted. I mean, do you have to swear to secrecy about certain things, or is there a protocol, or?
Well, the cops I know wouldn't talk about the kinds of things that I write about. So I make all of that up because, of course, Chicago is it's a watchword for civic probity and.
Yes. Not in your books, but.
No, the corruption in the Chicago police force, which is not as widespread as it was when I first moved to Chicago. But it's still a serious issue, and I don't know. Some of it is just outrageous, and there I've been relying on the news reports of a very dedicated investigative journalist in Chicago who now no longer has a job, but not because of his coverage of the police, but just because of the way that newsrooms have been slashed and burned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, after reading a few of the novels over the last couple of weeks, like the way that you portray the kind of elites of Chicago, church, police, media, the rich, I just thought, I'm amazed you would get invited anywhere. Like I said,
and yet here I am.
Did you ever get invited to a party or anything?
Yes, yes, yes.
Do you still get invited anywhere?
Only to very low rent events.